BBOR Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia at heart and from around the globe. And hello everybody, today is Wednesday, another Ripper Wednesday. Welcome to the show. How's everybody doing? On Wednesdays this year I've been talking to you guys about Jack the Ripper, perhaps the world's most famous unsolved mystery, and in this episode I will be looking at Samuel Friedman as a Jack the Ripper suspect. And Samuel Friedman is a different type of Jack the Ripper suspect because I particularly want to explore a theory that incorporates him into a multiple killers operation. And one of the reasons for this is I have to give a shout out to Randy Williams, who is the author of Sherlock Holmes and the Autumn of Terror, and I thank Randy Williams for visiting my channel, Black Box Online Radio. And I've done 3 episodes in the past where I was talking about Randy Williams and his book and his observations about the Jack the Ripper case. And Randy Williams has 3 main suspects that he believes committed the crimes that have been attributed to Jack the Ripper, as opposed to a single killer theory. He has multiple killers in his theory, and Jack the Ripper's crime spree began on August 31st of 1888 and went to November 9th of 1888, but that is just what we call the Autumn of Terror, or those are the canonical victims that have been attributed to Jack the Ripper. Jack the Ripper's crimes may have started earlier or after that. Whatever happened before or after the Autumn of Terror is still part of the mystery. But the Whitechapel murders, the overall name Whitechapel murders, begins in the spring of 1888 with the murder of Emma Smith and goes to 1891 with the murder of Francis Coles. And Randy Williams is someone who believes that the crimes that have been attributed to Jack the Ripper, or at the very least, the crimes that were committed by his 3 suspects, did indeed begin in the spring of 1888 and did go well beyond just what we call the Autumn of Terror after November 9th of 1888, where we saw the death of Mary Kelly. For example, one of the crimes that Randy Williams will incorporate into his theory is the murder of Emma Smith herself, who claimed that she was attacked by multiple men, and at least 3 men. And he also states that the 3 men will match the descriptions of his 3 suspects. And his 3 suspects are Louis Dean Schutz, Isaac Kosabrodsky, and Samuel Friedman. And the reason why I wanted to do this episode was because I had done an episode in the past on Louis Schutz, about 2 years ago actually, and the most recent episode of Ripper Wednesday was the one that I had done on Isaac Kosabrodsky as a suspect, and I was actually quite surprised that Randy Williams responded to the one from 2 years ago, just purely by chance, shortly after I did the Isaac Kosabrodsky episode where I was talking a lot about Randy Williams and his book. He responded to the episode on Louis Schutz from 2 years ago, and I'm going to just read off this comment that he wrote out here. Thanks for presenting my theory, but you got some key points wrong. Other key factors were misstated here, but you got about 60% of my theory right. Just finished listening to the rest of the episode. You are very uninformed on the case and my evidence. Louis Schutz was not just driving by, he lived at the crime scene of the murder of Liz Stride. I did a ton of research and I am in London right now. You need to learn a lot more about my findings before publishing a rebuttal to my case. So the first point is, I would like to admit wholeheartedly that, yes, that was one of the first episodes that I did for the Ripper Wednesday segment. And there was a particular reason why I did the Louis Schutz episode so early on, and it all goes back to jacktheripper.org that has this ongoing poll about who are the most likely suspect. People can vote whom they think Jack the Ripper was. Which suspect do people in the audience or people who are following the page think was Jack the Ripper? And I saw that Louis Schutz was one of the choices, and I wanted to explore that one because I was just really quite surprised that Louis Schutz, who was a witness to the events following the death of Liz Stride, was a Jack the Ripper suspect himself, and not the first, but the second episode that I ever did about Jack the Ripper here on Black Box Online Radio focused on the murder of Liz Stride. So I had read about Schutz in the past, and I wanted to hear this theory on how Louis Schutz could be the Jack the Ripper, and that brought me to Randy Williams and his material. But as previously stated, Randy Williams proposes that there were at least 3 killers: Louis Schutz, Isaac Kosabrodsky, and Samuel Friedman. So, yes, I admit that did, I was not very informed at the time. Now, this thing here about getting 60% of his theory right, I've also decided to listen to some more things that Randy Williams has put out online. He did an interview with RT Productions, as well as one with a program called the Sherlock Conversations. And I was listening to these two interviews, and he was sharing some more things about his theory and the reasons why he thinks that these three people were responsible for the crimes that have been attributed to Jack the Ripper. So let's go through some of that right now. If I can articulate 60% of what he's trying to say, I'm going to try my best. But, I mean, I'm always open to correction. And if you guys have anything to say about Jack the Ripper, you can put your ideas in the comment section down below. You can also hit the like button and subscribe if you want to follow along with Ripper Wednesday. I also do regular episodes about the Zodiac Killer and D.B. Cooper here on this channel, and you can just put something in the comment section down below, or you can send larger things to me at blackboxonlineradio@aol.com. But if I had to describe Randy Williams' theory about Jack the Ripper in a nutshell, it is that there was a movement that was created by the Russian anarchist Peter Kropotkin, who directed Louis Diemschutz to commit a series of murders because they wanted to draw attention to the terrible conditions in London, particularly in Whitechapel, and they also wanted to put an end to something called the sweating system, where lots of people who were Jewish, the way that Samuel Friedman, Isaac Kosabratsky, and Louis Diemschutz were trying to leave places like Eastern Europe because they thought that they were going to be in a place that was filled with freedom, but ultimately they were involved in the sweating system. They get out of one country and they end up in England, and they're working in sweatshops, and they're also living in a place like Whitechapel with terrible conditions. And this also ties into something about how there were crimes that were being committed because they wanted to draw attention to the fact that the needy can never be free. And they believed that prostitution was one thing that was only done by people who were in desperate need. And they were murdering people who were streetwalkers, ladies of the night, and they wanted to use these crimes just as a way to put an enormous spotlight, an enormous magnifying glass on the horrendous conditions that people were experiencing in England. And then this also developed a type of, not exactly an attack on Christianity, but they were definitely making a statement against the Christian churches, both the Catholic Church and the Eastern Orthodox Church. And there are several reasons for this. For starters, they may have been opposed to corruption, or that there's a statement that he made during the RT Productions interview about how there were mishandling of funds of a particular branch of the church, but also just the fact that these are Russian Jewish anarchists who are not filled with hatred toward Christianity, but they are more or less criticizing the system itself. And again, it's an effort to change modern culture, and I did a whole episode about this called Did Jack the Ripper Change Modern Culture? But Samuel Friedman, if he's going to be the title character in this episode, he is someone who was a type of tailor that would work with hats called, he had several different professions that he could perhaps do, a milliner, a tailor, and he was also somebody who was more or less like a hat shaper, if I've understood correctly. And a lot of people believe that Jack the Ripper would have had a type of familiarity with the streets of London and the streets of Whitechapel, and Samuel Friedman was someone who had his shop about a block away from the scene where Liz Stride was murdered. Liz Stride is the third victim of Jack the Ripper. The first was Polly Nichols, the second was Annie Chapman, the third was Liz Stride, the fourth was Catherine Eddowes, and the fifth was Mary Kelly. And again, if I've understood what Randy Williams has tried to say is that Samuel Friedman is the suspect for the murder of Catherine Eddowes, who was killed in Mitre Square, and that after the murder of Liz Stride, which was committed by Isaac Kosabratsky and Louis Diemschutz, that Samuel Friedman is the one who made his way to Mitre Square and murdered Catherine Eddowes. And the reason why this happened is because the murder of Liz Stride was a diversion. There was an intentional act of committing this murder. They wanted to commit two murders in one night because, again, they're trying to make a mockery of Christianity. They're trying to insult Christianity, particularly the Eastern Orthodox Church. And the murders occurred on different nights in the Eastern Orthodox calendar, the Theotokos nights. Excuse me for mispronouncing it in the past. I used to call them Theotokos, but I heard an interview with Randy Williams where he stated it's pronounced Theotokos. And the Theotokos nights are the holy nights where they honor the Mother of God, or Mary. And these, the events of Jack the Ripper fall in line with the Theotokos nights. And September 30th, the night when Liz Stride and Catherine Eddowes were murdered, is the night of the most holy, Theotokos. But to help us out, I'm going to go over to an article from Psychology Today, and it says, every year there is at least one new theory about the identity of the infamous Jack the Ripper. As we near the 130th anniversary, it's actually now 136 now, the crimes will be forever discussed. We've seen everything from surgeons to artists to writers to pornographers, including the famous and the rich. Was the person responsible for a series of murders in Whitechapel in 1888 even one man? One theorist at least says no. Popular depictions of the Ripper tend to show the elusive figure in an opera cloak and carrying a bag, although there's no conclusive evidence for either of them. Many people believe that Jack sent letters and gave himself his infamous moniker, but we don't know this either. We've even heard claims that DNA has identified the evil perpetrator, but those claims have holes. Another Jack the Ripper author was saying that this was nothing but a media creation. There was once an article posted called Case Closed, adding that 2 people had done the killings for terroristic purposes. Giles Brandreth believes that the murder total was 10 and the spree lasted nearly 6 years. Case closed? Not yet, unless you're one of the theorists who has made the claim. Not everyone agrees on when the murders began, but canonically it was the end of August in 1888. 2 prostitutes were murdered in 2 separate events a week apart, and then there was the so-called double event on September 30th. Then a letter came to the head of the Whitechapel Vigilance Committee accompanying by half a kidney. In a new book, and again this is from a couple years ago, in a new book, Sherlock Holmes in the Autumn of Terror, author Randy Williams offers the theory that a team of killers operated, and this time 3. He also writes it in a fictional framework, but based on facts. It's not easy to work outside the frame of tradition and expectation, especially when so many other experts remain inside. But Randy Williams boldly explores a set of suspects that, if correctly identified, would completely dismantle the Jack the Ripper traditions. They have been named in other reviews, so I'm giving nothing away. They are Louis Diemschutz, Isaac Kosabrodsky, and Samuel Friedman. Okay, so Samuel Friedman's involvement in this is a little bit beyond just accusing him of committing the murder of Catherine Eddowes. For example, as previously stated, Randy Williams is going to say that the murder of Emma Smith was also a Jack the Ripper victim. And there is another comment that Randy Williams left on my episode about Louis Diemschutz, and that is that, for example, Emma Smith described 3 men of the ages of my 3 suspects, Louis Diemschutz, Isaac Kosabrodsky, and Samuel Friedman. Not 3 ages for one person, but she described the appropriate ages, and Isaac Kosabrodsky would have been extremely young, actually, for a Jack the Ripper suspect in any way. He was only a teenager at the time, around 17 or 18 years old. Louis Diemschutz would have been 26, and Samuel Friedman would have been 42. And you're going to find that there are going to be Jack the Ripper suspects all up and down the spectrum. To people who think that there was a single killer, there are a lot of estimations that Jack the Ripper was around 30 years old. But as we're going to see very easily, a lot of people even have single killer theory suspects that are in their 40s and sometimes 50s. But with Samuel Friedman, he would have been 42 years old, and as previously stated, he worked in the hat business, and so did Isaac Kosabrodsky, and according to Randy Williams, so did Louis Diemschutz's wife. And one of the things that he uses to tie this into the concept of making a mockery of Christianity is that Samuel Friedman would have committed the murder of Catherine Eddowes, and this took place in Mitre Square, and the mitre is a hat that is worn by the Pope. That's the name of the famous hat that the Pope wears. And that's just another example. But I mean, I also want to be very clear about some things. The reason why I started revisiting this material happened well before Randy Williams wrote into my channel, and I wanted to do that episode on Isaac Kozabrowski, which I invite you guys to listen to, and that is because I really do appreciate Randy Williams and his eye for detail. He is a private investigator from Pennsylvania, and he is someone who may have just a good eye for noticing when something is wrong. And I told you guys in the Isaac Kozabrowski episode that at one point I even thought that he had cracked the murder of Liz Stride, and that how at least one of these three men was responsible for the murder of Liz Stride, and to go over that very briefly, there are certain discrepancies in the story from Louis Deemschutz, who is more or less a witness to finding Liz Stride's body, as well as Isaac Kozabrowski. And I mean, I'm gonna be very brief because I've discussed some of this on the channel before. But the story is that Louis Deemschutz is on his horse and cart, or sometimes it's referred to as a pony and cart, going down the street, and the horse shies at the scent of blood. And Randy Williams works on a horse farm, and I mean, he works with horses in Pennsylvania, and he knew that something was wrong with that because he stated that horses don't shy at the scent of blood. They wouldn't get bothered by that. So immediately he knew that something was wrong. The second point is, and this is one that I haven't talked about too frequently, and that is that Louis Deemschutz shaved his beard after the murder of Liz Stride, and he's like depicted as having a beard on the night of September 30th, 1888. But when they did an inquest after the murder of Liz Stride, he had shaved his beard, and this should have gone against the Jewish tradition, Louis Deemschutz being a Russian Jew. And there is another just point that I don't think is extremely suspicious, but he points out that Louis Deemschutz was an alias, and Deemschutz is not a Russian name, as I'm sure you guys can hear the sound of it. It can mean protector of noble women, or it can also mean protector of smoke, but it's a name that was made up. And there's another point that I also heard in that interview that I was just citing, where he states that he was the steward of the International Men's Working Club, which is the building near where Liz Stride was murdered, and he had been the steward for 6 years, but at the time, it was 6 or 7 years, excuse me, but apparently that was also completely false because he had only been with the club for 3 years, and it was a pure fabrication. So Randy Williams is noticing all of these things where Deemschutz is either not telling the truth or saying something suspicious, and me, somebody who was relatively a newcomer to the Jack the Ripper case, was just sitting there and looking at the reasons why he is suspicious of Deemschutz. And I'm like, he's raising some really good points. This seems extremely suspicious. But this is going to incorporate more than one person. And, I mean, again, Louis Deemschutz could not have committed all of the crimes because after the murder of Liz Stride, he is present there in Berners Street, and the murder of Catherine Eddowes happens in Mitre Square. And I shouldn't say in Berners Street because there's actually a lot of movement that happens around, but I mean, the point is that he did not go to Mitre Square to commit the murder of Catherine Eddowes, and the person who could have done that would have been Samuel Friedman. And at this point, though, I would really like to know, what do you guys think about anything that I have shared so far? What do you think about this concept of making a mockery of Christianity? What do you think about this concept of three people being involved in the Jack the Ripper crimes? But I want to go to a different article that was written by American Ghost Walks, just citing the source, and I'm going to, it's also going to discuss Randy Williams and his book Sherlock Holmes and the Autumn of Terror. So, Randy Williams posits that the murders were actually funded by a Russian prince who was a communist interested in social upheaval. He found his killers in the leadership of a socialist organization known as the International Working Men's Education Club. And as I said in a previous Ripper Wednesday, I always butcher that. You often hear me say the International Men's Club and so on, things like that. International Working Men's Education Club, which was a mainly Eastern European Jewish organization. They were interested in getting attention for the impoverished people of Whitechapel, and instead of using a bomb, they used a knife. And this is also what Randy Williams has shared in a lot of his public appearances, and that is that when we look at behaviors in the 21st century, people do things like this. People commit crimes in the name of political reasons. People commit crimes in the name of religious reasons. People commit crimes in the name of social attitudes because these things are not unheard of. I'm sure already you can think of some type of crime that was politically motivated or some type of crime that was religiously motivated. And but he says that this stuff was very, very influential. In the interview, Randy lays down the evidence on why he believes that the members of the club, Louis Diemschutz, Isaac Kosabrodsky, and Samuel Friedman, were the physical killers, while Prince Peter Alexievich Kropotkin was the instigator and the money man behind the killings. Randy Williams even believes that he has Kropotkin's confession from years later, as illustrated by a previous article. But we do know that the members of the International Working Men's Educational Club were a poorly treated community in the 1880s, and they were a part of the working class that were looking for any kind of break. And Kropotkin would defend Jack the Ripper later on by saying that they drew attention to the plight of the poorest Londoners, and particularly the young women who were forced to prostitute to sustain themselves. And as I said, this is all tying back to the concept of the needy can never be free. Now, as you see, I'm saying some things that may sound optimistic and praiseworthy of Randy Williams and his material, and even though I don't agree with all of his observations, I do think that his work is brilliant, and as he said, maybe I've only been able to digest 60% of it, and that's a fair statement. That's a fair statement. But there are some points that I do want to genuinely challenge, and one of them is that the people who are discussed in this theory were also involved in a violent encounter in 1889 when they were arrested for incidents of political violence and more or less participating in a riot. And it wasn't simply just being present there, that they were actually being very physical and even broke the leg of an officer. And just looking at how these people are willing to get violent in the name of their causes. Therefore, that could be a connection to the violence exhibited by Jack the Ripper. And that's one that I will have to disagree with, because just because someone has been involved with one form of political violence, it doesn't mean that they're going to be mutilating and disemboweling women. It doesn't mean that they're going to be completely eviscerating the bodies of women, like the way that Mary Kelly's body was torn up on November 9th of 1888. So that one also doesn't sit well with me. Now, this is going to be one where I'm not necessarily disagreeing with Randy Williams. I'm simply providing an alternative explanation. And one thing that he said in his interviews is that Liz Stride was murdered with a different sized knife than Catherine Eddowes. And again, we're talking about Samuel Friedman here as being a perpetrator. And that Liz Stride was murdered with a 9-inch blade, and Catherine Eddowes was murdered with a 6-inch blade, so you have two different knives, and this could also indicate two different killers. Not everyone is in agreement with that, because I have done an episode on Patricia Cornwell's book, Portrait of a Killer, where she talks about her Jack the Ripper observations, and she proposed that Jack the Ripper was actually just using one knife, and it was a type of blade called the Indian Pesh Cobbs, which has a type of curvature in the blade, and that's why it could appear to have been shorter or longer, because it's a different size blade, and it's a different shaped blade, and that is her take on the subject. And once again, I invite you to check out that episode. It's called Portrait of a Killer, Jack the Ripper. Full discussion here on Ripper Wednesday on Black Box Online Radio. But there's one final note that I will leave you guys with, and I'm just going to go back to the article from American Ghost Walks, and it says, "Enter Randy Williams, a martial artist, private eye, and former bodyguard to Steven freaking Seagal." And yes, it does say that here, Steven freaking Seagal. Yeah, he'll definitely have to talk about that sometime. Randy has led several fascinating lives, but his career as a ripperologist brings him to us today. Randy's theory is not that Steven Seagal was Jack the Ripper. And of course, right? this is my own point. Steven Seagal is not a suspect in the Ripper case. Of course, those crimes happened years before he was born. But I've brought this up on my Monday show when I talk about the Zodiac Killer, that Steven Seagal does fit extremely neatly into the Zodiac Killer timeline. And real fast, the Zodiac Killer operated in 1968 and 69. The Zodiac wrote letters from 1969 to 1971. There was no Zodiac activity in 1972 and 73, conveniently when Steven Seagal left the United States and went to Japan. And then the Zodiac activities resumed in 1974. Conveniently, Steven Seagal returned to the United States in 1974, and that just all mashed up on the timeline. Like, when I was reading Steven Seagal's Wikipedia, I took a screenshot of it, and I was like, this could be a Zodiac Killer suspect's Wikipedia looking at this timeline. But that also needs to be a very strong point, and this is something where I am not making light of anything. And this is even about Randy Williams or Samuel Friedman's involvement in the Ripper case. This is about something else. And that is that we can't just look at gaps in activity and say, well, that's evidence. I mean, if Steven Seagal's timeline matches up with the Zodiac Killer, then any Zodiac suspect or Jack the Ripper suspect who has some type of gap in their activities, well, what was this person doing during these years? We don't really know. Maybe they were Jack the Ripper. Maybe they were the Zodiac Killer. Insufficient evidence. And I've said it once, and I'll say it again here on Black Box Online Radio. I don't want to hear about what someone didn't do. I want to hear about what they actually did. But what do you think about this theory that Randy Williams has put forward on Samuel Friedman, Isaac Kosabrodsky, and Louis Diemschutz as being Jack the Ripper? And I'm probably going to redo the Louis Diemschutz episode at a certain point because, again, it was a very rough episode that I made about 2 years ago. But if anything, I would just invite you to listen to the Isaac Kosabrodsky episode. And some final notes would be that, firstly, there is a possible Jack the Ripper letter. Again, it's not accepted by everyone, but it's called the McCarthy letter, that was written after the murder of Mary Kelly. McCarthy was the name of Mary Kelly's landlord, and Randy Williams believes that there are certain images and drawings at the bottom of the McCarthy letter that tie back to his three suspects, Samuel Friedman, Louis Diemschutz, and Isaac Kosabrodsky. But I really would just invite you to watch his video on that. I was even thinking about playing his video here as like a portion of this Ripper Wednesday, but I thought the only way that it would make sense in context was if I played the whole video, so I'm just going to invite you to check out his YouTube channel or his Facebook page, Sherlock Holmes in the Autumn of Terror, where you can watch the entire video on the McCarthy letter. And one truly final concluding note is that one of the people that is on the cover of Randy Williams' book, and by that I mean in name, is Dr. Cyril Wecht, and he is someone whom I have discussed before on Black Box Online Radio for a completely different set of stories. I did an episode once called The Mind of O.J. Simpson True Crime Talk Radio, where not only did I look at the O.J. Simpson case, but also some other true crime stories of former NFL players. And the reason why I was exploring Cyril Wecht and his observations are because of a different Pennsylvania-related story, and it's found in the movie Concussion with Will Smith, where he plays Dr. Bennett Omalu. And, I mean, if anyone would like to hear more about that, and I invite you to listen to my episode, The Mind of O.J. Simpson, True Crime Talk Radio, and I'll include a link to that. But thank you so much for listening to this week's Ripper Wednesday. This segment is back in action, and I will see you on Friday for talking about D.B. Cooper. I am your host, Black Box Ned, and you can get this show on Facebook, Black Box Online Radio. You can write me at blackboxonlineradio@AOL.com. I'm also on Instagram, BlackBoxNed88, and I will see you over there. Until next time.